Welcome to a brand new Bannerlord campaign. I managed to get the Empires of Europe 1100 mod working, and so I thought I would play a game as an Englishman. I thought, what medieval Englishman would I like to be? Well, I'd like to be a yeoman, obviously. Maybe, in fact, I would like to use a bow. So I took skills that, of course, improved my bow skill. I am a natural leader of men, as I'm sure everyone will agree, and so I used my bow skills and leadership to hunt game, ride with the scouts, and of course treat people very well. I began my career at the young age of 20, and as I was going to be a bow-focused campaign, I of course had to take a bow banner. And being a kind of historic or legendary medieval Englishman, I naturally had to wear Lincoln green. Or the closest I could get to it, anyway. Yes, you may have worked out at this point, I am a Mr. Locksley. Robin of Locksley, in fact. I began my adventure somewhere out in the countryside surrounding London, and so I began moving from town to town recruiting men, specifically yeomen, who I intended to turn into the most formidable force of English archers the world had ever seen. Before long, I had amassed a force of 15 stout men, and I encountered some looters. And if there's one thing I disagree with, it's looting. So we engaged them on the battlefield. This was, of course, the first engagement Robin of Locksley had ever fought, and his men only had farm implements as weapons. Robin, in fact, was the only one with a bow. So I took my position in the line next to the men and began firing. Now, legends may say that Robin of Locksley is an amazing crack shot. But I can guarantee to you that he did not begin as an amazing crack shot, as I failed to hit anyone in the advance of this band of looters. I am not very good with the bow, I have to admit. In fact, it's kind of embarrassing how bad I am. But finally, I did manage to strike one just as they were about to engage with our line. And thankfully, my infantry could manfully fend them off. I did my best to help, but to be honest with you, it probably would have been more useful if I'd just done nothing. However, despite my best efforts, all of my men survived, and weren't even wounded in the conflict. So we took whatever prisoners were left, looted their bodies, and continued on our merry way. After I'd recruited 22 men, I discovered 5 forest bandits, otherwise known as ne'er-do-wells, who were occupying the Greenwood. Couldn't be having any of that. I can't stand competition, so we attacked them. Only 5 of my men had managed to be upgraded to yeoman longbowmen, and frankly, well, they weren't amazing either. Not that I was any better, so I really wasn't in a position to judge. After a while, it was becoming apparent that I was not going to be able to wipe out any of the enemy using my longbow at range, so I told my men to simply advance. I went ahead of my men on my sumpter horse, bravely, in order to try and prevent them from being shot up by the archers in this field. I didn't really accomplish all that much, because as much as I'm not a bowman, I'm not really very good with whatever spiked thing this is, and all I did was get shot for my trouble. But it did seem to give my men just enough time to engage with these bandits, and that was all they needed because they outnumbered them like 3 to 1. We only lost 2 Englishmen, which was not a bad result, all things considered, and I managed to upgrade another 7 of my men to be longbowmen. Interestingly, I also found this 180-pound war longbow. Now, that is a hell of a weapon. That is one of the most heavy longbows ever created, and I could not use it. So I decided to save it in my inventory for when I would be able to. We travelled around the English countryside, hunting down small and manageable groups of enemy bandits. Often these were armed themselves with longbows, which were much better than the bow I was using, and they were much better with them than I was. And so often, well, it didn't go brilliantly. Well, for me at least. My men did just fine. I went to London to sell some of my ill-gotten gain. Wait, is it ill-gotten gain if I'm stealing from a thief? To sell some of the goods that I had procured on my travels and to recruit more men. And there I encountered a man called Ali the Prince.
Right, so who might you be then?
He explained to me that he too was a bit of a vagabond, a man without a purpose, someone who was familiar with the hard life, and I felt some kinship with him. So I suggested that perhaps he should join my company, and he decided to extort me for 1,500 gold. I reluctantly paid it, and we went on our way. I had some level ups to do, so I decided to examine my skills, and to be honest with you, I've never really used the bow skill, and having a plus 30% headshot damage skill probably wasn't going to be all that useful, because I didn't see myself getting that many headshots. So I got the skill that allowed me to have less of a penalty while moving with the bow. I also examined Ali's skills. He didn't really have much, actually, other than roguery, which is useful enough if you control some of the alleys in the town and probably for some other things, but he couldn't use a bow either. Since he couldn't really do anything useful, I decided to make him the scout of our little band of merry men in the hopes that perhaps he'd develop some sort of talent or proficiency in that realm. We travelled around England, hunting down small squads of bandits, defeating them, levelling up our party and increasing the skill and competence of my merry men. Our travels took us to the city of York in the north, and while there I met a strange woman called Tagui the Exile. I wasn't really sure whether I should even talk to her, especially as the second her gaze met mine, I felt instantly weirded out. She told me her life story, and I was beginning to feel a little bit hypnotised by the constant stare that she was giving me, and I didn't really know what to say, so for some reason I offered her to join my company, and was deeply relieved when it turned out I simply didn't have enough money to hire her. We left York shortly after this. We continued hunting down the various small bands of forest bandits that we found around, and these were generally successful, but because of the nature of forest bandits having powerful bows and being entirely composed of ranged units, the casualties were always a lot higher than I was comfortable with. I travelled the length and breadth of England, from deepest, darkest Cornwall right up to the Scottish marches, and there I discovered that the Scots were having a problem with Viking raiders from across the seas who are harassing the good people of Scotland, so I decided I would try and put a stop to them. But what I discovered was quite a sizable array of Viking raiding parties, and I wasn't comfortable trying to take them all at once. My men, however good they may have been with bows, were only 23, and I personally didn't feel like I could pick up the slack. In trying to draw some away from the main group, I noticed that they had in fact spotted a travelling group of peasants and gone to attack them, so I rushed to the defence of these peasants. I tried to arrange my men so that they were going to be on the flank of the main line of the peasants, as well as any levy Englishmen I had, so they'd get a clear shot at them. But before I could actually set up some kind of strategic line, the Scottish peasants decided that it was just in their nature to charge, regardless of what the enemy were, and whether this made any kind of tactical sense. The average Scottish peasant is not actually a match on the battlefield for a heavily armed Viking raider, and there was very little I could actually do to save them from themselves, except charge the English infantry in with the hope of supporting them, and praying to God that the English archers would be able to give enough covering fire to maybe help them out. This, however, didn't work. All of the Scottish peasants got basically murdered, along with my English levies. It became evident that this battle was not going very well at all, and I didn't really know what else to do other than to retreat back to the lines of longbowmen and hope that we would be able to shoot them down before they'd be able to reach us and cut us apart. But fortunately, by this point, the Scottish horde had been thinned down to only about 5 men, and we were able to shoot them down before they were able to do any real damage to us. By the time they reached our lines, they were exhausted, wounded, and completely outnumbered. Despite the horrific casualties in trying to defend these peasants, mostly from the peasants, we had prevailed. My men had gained a lot of experience on the battlefield, and we were ready to continue. I returned to Nottingham and met a man called Vincien the Fish.
What is it, stranger?
Strange name. But for some reason, he seemed quite friendly, and so I decided, sure, why not? I'll hire you. Perhaps you've got some useful skills. Maybe you could be a very handy person to have in my company. It turned out that Vincien had absolutely no skills whatsoever, apart from the ability to swing a sword and run. Neither were that helpful in a company of bowmen, but I'd already paid 1,500 gold for him, so we went on our merry way. However, I needed him to do something, so I moved Ali over to the engineering, that he was no good at, and I put Vincien in the place of the scout, which he also was no good at, but I needed him to do something to justify the wages that I was going to pay him. We returned to Scotland to do battle with the Sea Raiders, and I managed to score an absolutely crushing victory over 10 of these Sea Raiders. I placed the infantry on the brow of a hill while I rode down to distract the Sea Raiders, and thankfully they would throw their javelins at me while I was moving quickly, and not my archers, who were pretty much stationary. I tried to distract them and do some damage with my horse archery skills, but these were actually even worse than when I was firing a bow on foot. But by the time they had arrived at our lines, they had taken a few volleys of arrows, and I was able to send forth the small number of English levies that I had behind the line of archers to engage and hold up the Sea Raiders. None of my men were killed and wounded, and we killed all of them. I was very pleased with this victory, and it only required us to outnumber our opponents by 2-1. After this, I was feeling quite bold, and discovered on one of the Scottish Isles a very large band of Vikings, 21 of them versus our 23 Englishmen. So we went to the attack. Being just a company of archers, there was very little tactics actually involved with this kind of deployment. All I could do is put my men in a line, get down and join them, and wait for the enemy to come over the brow of the hill, which they did, and my men and I began firing volley after volley at them, and I was absolutely no use whatsoever. My archery skills were very, very poor. And then came the rain of javelins, which I have to say, really hurt. We kept firing as they advanced upon us, and I sent the small number of English levies that I had, that had not yet been upgraded to archers, in to engage with them. I did my best, and I really was focusing on trying to only shoot the Vikings, but I wasn't brilliant. I did get a few half-decent hits in, but it's dicey shooting into a melee. I really wasn't sure how this battle had been going while I was fighting it, and so I was very relieved to suddenly find the Vikings turning tail and running. And thankfully, when the dust had settled, only 4 of our men had actually died. I returned to Nottingham to hire new yeomen, and discovered that there was, in fact, a tournament on. Now, you may not know this, but according to legend, Robin of Locksley was not only a very fine swordsman, but also famous for winning tournaments. So I joined, and in the first round, it was me and another man in green, which was appropriate, against 3 other duos in red, yellow, and blue. So we engaged with the red duo, and frankly, didn't do brilliantly. This didn't actually go very well at all, and my partner got knocked down, so I was forced to retreat under a rain of blows from the red team, right into the blue team who had defeated the yellows. This gave me some breathing room, and you might think, oh well, this is very useful. And useful it would have been had I not accidentally knocked out both of the members of the red team, rather than letting them fight amongst themselves. My shield got knocked off my arm, and suddenly I was left, well, practically defenseless. Then my mace was knocked out of my hand, so I thought, right, okay, well, what I will try and do is run to the remains of the yellow team, pick up their weapons, and fight onwards. But by the time I had got one of their weapons, it was too late and I was knocked down. And normally that's where the tournament would end, but for some reason, presumably luck of the draw, they needed an extra man for the next round, and I was allowed through. The next round was another duel round, but between two teams, one man having a shield and a mace, and the other a crossbow and a longsword. Thankfully, though, this went, well, exactly according to plan, as we let their melee fighter run over to us, took him, defeated him 2-on-1, and then I ran over and beat up their crossbowman with little effort. The next round was a 1-on-1 with billhooks. This is a traditional English weapon of war, and every Englishman instinctively knows how to use them, which is why I took an almighty smack to the face, which no doubt really hurt. It didn't kill me though, and I returned it for the win. The final round was a 1-on-1 with myself and an archer armed only with maces, not even with a shield. This didn't last long for him, and the tournament was mine. And what had I won? A golden arrow? No. Some javelins. Brilliant. So I marched off with merely the renown gained from the tournament. But what this had done is put me up to the next clan tier and allowed me to now recruit 48 men. So I went around looking for more sturdy yeomen to join my merry men. I found a forest bandit hideout, and of course, jealous of any competition, I decided that we would raid it and clear it out. I didn't want to take my best men though, just in case A, they died, and B, because they wouldn't get any experience. So I took a few archers, but mostly a bunch of inexperienced levies, and we snuck in under the cover of night. We spotted a couple of the bandits milling around and talking on the edge of the camp, and so I gave them a surprise shot, and then told my men to attack. Though I lost one of my men in the assault, and took more arrows to the face than I was comfortable with, we actually dispatched the guards on the outside of this fort with relative ease, and decided to make our way inside. We ambushed the unaware bandits inside the fort, causing them probably quite a lot of shock. And to be honest with you, again, this wasn't a very difficult fight. I actually thought that my levies would have more trouble than they did. Frankly, the most trouble that they really got from this was when, well, I accidentally slipped and perhaps gave one or two of them a shot in the knee maybe that they didn't deserve. Once his men had been defeated, the bandit leader came out to challenge me to a duel. Now, I didn't think I could win a duel with this guy, so I decided to just let my men have at him. Thankfully, he only had 2 men with him, and we significantly outnumbered them. As hard as they fought, we fought harder, and we eventually won. The bandit lair was clear. With our forces growing, and confidence on the field increasing, Robin of Locksley started to get some interesting ideas in his head. Just how effective was a purely archer army? Well, we would have to find out.